You think the 1970s was all avocado green appliances and shag carpets? Think again. These suburban kitchens served up some of the most creative, economical, and surprisingly satisfying ground beef dishes in American culinary history. Their real recipes served real families across America during an era of economic uncertainty, gas shortages, and skyrocketing grocery prices. Let's dig into 25 ground beef recipes from the 1970s that kept families fed, happy, and coming back for seconds, even when times were tough. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. 1. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. When beef prices soared in the early recession, this humble dish became a quiet hero on dinner tables. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes wasn't just food. It was a survival strategy wrapped in warmth. Picture a cast iron skillet sizzling as ground beef browned. Right in that same pan, flour joined the drippings to form a roux, turning golden before milk smoothed it into a rich, creamy gravy peppered with chunks of meat. Spoon it generously over buttery mashed potatoes, and what you had was more than sustenance. It was reassurance. The kind that made Dad feel full even when the paycheck felt small. Each bite soaked into those spuds, creating savory little explosions of comfort. Today's gourmet comfort food trends have nothing on this soulful classic. It gave families strength when days were hard. It was budget food with real heart, and once you tasted it, you always came back for seconds. 2. Porcupine Meatballs. Porcupine Meatballs. Yes, the name raised eyebrows, but it also guaranteed empty plates. No animals were harmed, of course. These quirky meatballs earned their name from the tiny white rice grains mixed right into the beef, poking out like little quills as they cooked. In neighborhoods all over Middle America, these were the darlings of church potlucks and PTA nights. Ground beef met uncooked rice, onion, and egg, rolled into tight golf ball-sized bundles. Nestled into a bubbling bath of tomato soup, Campbell's, naturally, these meatballs simmered like a secret shared between neighbors. The rice soaked up the tangy liquid and gently pushed outward, creating that telltale texture between meatloaf and stuffed pepper. It wasn't just food. It was community, ingenuity, and flavor all rolled into one. With 2 humble ingredients and a stovetop, home cooks made magic. And on Sundays, these meatballs almost felt like a celebration. 3. Tater Tot Casserole. This is where convenience collides gloriously with indulgence. Tater Tot Casserole, Midwesterners lovingly call it hot dish, embodied the era's love affair with easy, filling comfort. How could it not? Ground beef browned with onions and layered into a pan. Next came a salty, creamy blanket of condensed mushroom soup, straight from the can, unashamed. Then the piece de resistance, rows of golden tater tots lined up like soldiers across the top. Into the oven it went, and what came out 40 minutes later was a bubbling, crispy-topped marvel. The fork breaking that crunchy tot layer, diving into the savory beef below, was all the invitation you needed. This dish wasn't made to impress fancy food critics. It was made to fill every seat and every stomach at every gathering, to be scooped, sighed over, and devoured without apology. Processed perfection, crafted with heart, and not a moment wasted. 4. Old School Goulash. Ask any Midwestern grandma and she'll swear by her skillet's loyalty and a good bowl of goulash, though Hungarians might protest the name. This was American chop suey, forged out of weeknight chaos and culinary wisdom. The kind of dish that didn't need a recipe, just a rhythm passed down over decades. First, beef sizzled with diced onions in a hot pan, caramelizing into something deeply savory. Then elbow macaroni, canned tomatoes, and mystery veggies from the fridge joined in. It all simmered in one pot, the pasta soaking up every drop of beefy, tomato-y delight. It was adaptable. If you had green peppers, great. Cheese on top, even better. It wasn't fussy. It wasn't formal. But it smelled like home and tasted like nostalgia. Born from post-war ingenuity and raised in the recession of the 70s, it was a small victory in every bite, and a reminder that good food doesn't need a pedigree. 5. Beef and Cabbage Skillet. When times got lean, Cabbage stepped into the spotlight. At just pennies per pound, it became one of the most reliable partners for ground beef in America's kitchens. And in this recipe, it didn't just stretch the meat, it elevated it. The process was simple yet brilliant. Brown the beef in your trusty electric skillet, that avocado green heirloom that earned its place on your wedding registry. Toss in thick slices of cabbage, letting them wilt and soften in the rendered fat. A splash of Worcestershire, maybe a can of tomatoes, a bit of salt and pepper, just enough to coax out hidden sweetness. As the cabbage cooked down, it absorbed every drop of that meaty flavor, turning into silky ribbons of satisfaction. Plated hot with buttered white bread on the side, it wasn't stylish, but it was smart. A one-pan miracle that turned budget eating into hearty, unforgettable meals. 6. Beef and macaroni skillet. Long before boxed mixes made it a brand, there was the original weeknight hero, beef and macaroni skillet. The idea was simple: stretch the meat, save time, and feed everybody with one pan and zero leftovers. You'd start with beef sizzling in a scarred wooden spoon-worthy skillet, breaking it into crisp-edged morsels. Garlic powder added a hint of flair. Fresh garlic was still the stuff of gourmet chefs, not suburban pantries. In went elbow macaroni, beef broth made from bouillon cubes and a generous squirt of ketchup or canned tomato sauce. Then the magic part: no draining required. Everything simmered together, the macaroni drinking in the beefy, tangy liquid. Just before serving, a last-minute handful of shredded cheddar melted into gooey pockets of joy. It was weekday resilience served hot. No frills, no Pinterest boards. Just honest food that delivered exactly what the 1970s promised: fast, filling, and frugal. 7. Chipwreck Casserole. It had a name that sounded like chaos, and lived up to it in the best way possible. Shipwreck Casserole was what happened when creativity met a nearly empty pantry and someone dared to bake it anyway. The base was familiar: brown ground beef blended with a creamy condensed soup, either mushroom or chicken, then layered into a casserole dish like a foundation you could count on. And then, the twist: an unapologetic avalanche of crushed potato chips. Some mixed into the beef, others heaped proudly on top. Cheese, when available, was strongly recommended, especially the kind that came pre-shredded in plastic bags. Melted all together in the oven, and chips that began as crunchy snacks transformed. The top stayed crisp, the inside evolved into salty, starchy tunnels of surprise. It was indulgent, it was over the top, and it was oddly comforting. A wild casserole ride that proved delicious sometimes comes from wreckage. 8. Meatloaf Muffins. Sometimes innovation comes in muffin tins. Somebody somewhere realized that slicing into a meatloaf took time, and that time was a luxury in the 1970s. Enter meatloaf muffins, portable, personal, and cooked in half the time. You'd start with ground beef, breadcrumbs softened in milk, diced onions, eggs, and a squeeze of ketchup just sweet enough to charm the kids. Instead of dumping it into a loaf pan, you'd spoon the mix into greased muffin tins, crafting tiny, tidy rounds that cooked in just 25 minutes. Each muffin got a perfect crust, caramelized on all sides. No dry centers, no battling for end pieces. The final touch: a glaze of ketchup and brown sugar that bubbled and charred just enough. These weren't just practical. They were charming, freeze-ahead miracles for moms headed to Tupperware parties or ballpark bleachers. Served with mashed potatoes and canned beans, they made dinner feel smart and modern. 9. Beef and biscuit ring. It looked like something from a vintage recipe magazine, but came together with shockingly little effort. The beef and biscuit ring was a showstopper meets shortcut, a 1970s homemaker's dream. You debrown the beef with diced onions and season it generously. Add sweet corn or green beans if the crisp are allowed, then let it cool slightly. Next came the fun part: refrigerated biscuit dough arranged in a wreath on a baking sheet, overlapping to form a seamless ring. The beef filling was spooned inside, the biscuit flaps folded over like a cozy blanket. Baked at 375 degrees, it emerged golden brown, the edges puffed and the center bubbling with savory flavor. The biscuits soaked in just enough of the juices to become tender, never soggy. And when you placed it on the dinner table, perhaps with a cheeky smile, it offered the illusion of hours of work. Reality: 15 minutes of prep in a cold trash tube. 10. Porcupine rice bake. Imagine all the quirky charm of porcupine meatballs, but hands-free, oven-baked, and tailor-made for busy households. Porcupine rice bake took the stovetop staple and reimagined it as a throw-it-and-then-forget-it casserole, perfect for America's rising force of working moms. The principle was the same. Uncooked rice mixed right into the ground beef gave the dish its famous quills. But instead of shaping individual meatballs, you depressed the mixture evenly into a casserole dish. The key was the liquid, usually tomato soup thinned with water or the fancy version, tomato sauce and beef bouillon. Covered tightly, it baked for an hour, the rice slowly swelling and pushing out through the beef blanket like grains reclaiming space. Uncovered at the end, that top got toasty and caramelized like a baked crust formed by luck and patience. Paired with salad and garlic bread, it looked organized, even when your life wasn't. Casserole saves the day. Again. 11. Beef Jambalaya bake. The 1970s weren't immune to culinary wanderlust, but when it came to exotic dishes, everything passed through a Midwestern filter. Enter beef jambalaya bake, a Creole classic reworked for casseroles and convenience. Inspired by Louisiana's spicy traditions, it started with ground beef and the Holy Trinity, bell peppers, onions, and celery, though dehydrated onion flakes often stood in for fresh. Add canned tomatoes and white rice, then the signature 1970s twist, a packet of Lipton onion soup mix for good measure. Everything went into a casserole dish, along with just enough water to agitate the rice into tenderness. Covered and baked in under an hour, it skipped the classic stovetop simmering in favor of one-dish ease. Was it traditional jambalaya? No chance. But to a suburban family craving something outside the norm, it was a big-hearted detour. Served with cornbread and curiosity, it brought regional flair into homes that had never seen the Gulf. 12. Hamburger biscuit bake. This recipe took two beloved ingredients, ground beef and refrigerated biscuits, and fused them one layer at a time into comfort food gold. But unlike its showy cousin, the biscuit ring hamburger biscuit bake was grounded, casual, and quietly brilliant. You'd start by browning beef and folding in condensed soup, mushroom or maybe chicken, plus frozen mixed vegetables borrowed from the freezer stash. All of that got poured into a rectangular casserole pan, creating a thick, savory foundation. Then came the biscuit magic. The dough was torn into quarters and scattered over the top like a savory cobbler. Some cooks went the extra mile, brushing those crusts with melted butter and a sprinkle of garlic powder for flair. Baked until the biscuits puffed into golden pillows, their base soaked slightly in the creamy filling, the dish offered the kind of contrast food dreams are made of. Crispy, tender, creamy, chewy, all in one forkful. 13. Mock prime rib patties. In the 1970s, prime rib was a splurge reserved for life's rarest celebrations. But with a little imagination and a little liquid smoke, ground beef learned how to fake it. Mock prime rib patties were born from aspiration with a side of practicality. Ground beef got mixed with breadcrumbs, Worcestershire, garlic powder, and that unmistakable essence of campfire, bottled smoke. Shaped into thick, hearty patties, they were seared in a hot skillet until browned and crusty. The final flourish came from a sauce made with mushroom soup, cut with beef broth or inexpensive red wine. These weren't burgers, they were ambitions, plated with roasted spuds and canned asparagus. Medium rare, not exactly, but the illusion was intentional. These patties carried pride. You weren't eating steak, but you were eating smart. And for birthdays or anniversaries when your budget whispered ramen, these dressed-up beef medallions helped you shout, "Tonight, we dine." 14. Beef and potato hash casserole. The 70s were all about bending rules, and this casserole did it deliciously by turning breakfast into dinner. Beef and potato hash casserole brought cowboy soul into suburban kitchens and made frozen hash browns a weeknight essential. Ground beef was browned, merged with thawed potatoes, cream of celery soup, sour cream, and melted cheddar cheese. Stirred together, this creamy, savory mass went into a pan like a big rustic promise. Then came the detail nobody skipped, cornflake topping tossed with melted butter. After an hour in the oven, it emerged golden and bubbling. The hash browns had softened inside yet remained crispy on the edges, and the cornflakes added a crunch that turned every bite into a texture party. Some families served fried eggs on top, blending breakfast and dinner into one. But however you scooped it, this dish threw meal boundaries out the window and didn't look back. 15. Beef Tamale Pie. Despite the cathedral-sounding name, there was nothing solemn about beef tamale pie, unless you counted how reverently kids inhaled it. Think shepherd's pie's vibrant, southwestern cousin. Ground beef browned with onions, then combined with freezer vegetables, peas, corn, whatever was cheap, and thickened with a luscious beef gravy made from flour, bouillon, and pan drippings. That rich filling formed the base. Then a thick topper of mashed potatoes, fluffy, buttery, often instant, was spread triumphantly on top and fluffed with forked tines for maximum golden-baked goodness. A final dab of butter helped create a crackling crust when it hit the oven. Pulling it out revealed layers of flavor, a brown potato lid hiding a bubbling, savory core. Each forkful delivered the satisfaction of a Sunday roast at a third of the cost. Practical, welcoming, and humble, it was both architectural marvel and an edible comfort quilt for struggling families. 16. Hamburger Spoonbread Casserole. Take the smooth soul of Southern spoon bread and give it a hearty, meaty backbone, and you've got Hamburger Spoonbread Casserole. It was something different, something bold, and something wonderfully confusing. Was it cornbread with meat inside, or meat with cornbread on top? Yes, that was the whole point. You'd mix a pourable batter of cornmeal, eggs, milk, baking powder, and butter to create something softer than cornbread but firmer than pudding. Meanwhile, ground beef cooked with onions, and maybe a few chopped chilies for heat, simmered into a rich, savory base. The meat went into a greased dish first, then topped with the spoonbread batter, which would melt around the filling and puff as it baked. The top emerged golden, tender, and just slightly crisp, while underneath it all melded together into a warm, scoopable masterpiece. It was part Southern roots, part Midwestern practicality, and all-around casserole brilliance. 17. Homemade Sloppy Joes. Yes, canned manwich was available in the 70s, but true aficionados knew. Real Sloppy Joes deserved the homemade touch. This wasn't some pour-and-eat shortcut, it was legacy food, passed down from cafeteria-style lunches and perfected in countless suburban kitchens. Ground beef was browned with onions and green peppers to caramelize perfection. Then came the sauce, sweet ketchup, a bit of brown sugar, tangy yellow mustard, savory Worcestershire, and a splash of vinegar that brought the whole thing to life. Some cooks spiced it up with tomato paste or hot sauce depending on the crowd. It simmered until thick, not runny, not soupy. Perfectly sloppy. Scooped onto soft hamburger buns, these juicy mounds all but guaranteed sticky fingers and laughter around the table. Napkins were useless. Served with potato chips and pickles, this lunchroom throwback doubled as a Saturday night celebration. Not fancy, not fussy, just joy between bread and tradition in every bite. 18. Beef Enchilada Casserole. In the 1970s, the American palate started to flirt with Mexican flavors, and casseroles made it accessible and crowd-friendly. Beef enchilada casserole skipped the detail-heavy process of rolling individual enchiladas and turned everything into an easy-to-layer stack of deliciousness. Ground beef was browned with a packet of taco seasoning, Old El Paso or Lowry S, both vying for pantry supremacy. Then came the base, canned enchilada sauce, mild enough for cautious taste buds. Corn tortillas were sliced into strips, layered with the beef mixture, refried beans straight from the can, and sharp cheddar cheese. Then it was repeated. More layers, more cheese, more flavor. The tortillas softened like noodles during baking, and the top bubbled until golden. Usually finished with a generous scoop of sour cream, lettuce, tomatoes, and canned black olives, it looked like taco night's grown-up cousin. Not authentic, but thoroughly American in spirit and endlessly loved at every family dinner. 19. Beef and bean burrito bake. Hot on the heels of the enchilada casserole came its less formal cousin, the beef and bean burrito bake. Families loved burritos, but rolling a dozen by hand after a long workday wasn't happening. This dish skipped that step and embraced the ease of layering. Ground beef met taco seasoning, sautéed into something smoky and rich. In came canned pintos or refried beans, stretching the mix into hearty abundance. At its purest, the filling was rolled into tortillas and arranged neatly in a casserole dish. But the working mom-approved shortcut tossed that idea. The lazy layer version laid tortillas flat on the bottom, added filling, threw on cheese, then repeated until the final flourish. Spicy enchilada sauce and a gooey cheese crown. Baked till bubbly and just crisp on top, it's sliced like Tex-Mex lasagna. The tortillas transformed into soft, savory layers, part noodle, part flatbread. Quick, bold, and gloriously messy. 20. Beef stuffed peppers. Stuffed peppers had been around for generations, but the 1970s gave them a weeknight makeover. They no longer belonged to fancy occasions. They were practical, economical, and packed with clever thinking. Bell peppers were sliced lengthwise and halved, seeds and membranes removed, turned into edible canoes ready for the good stuff. A quick parboil softened them to cook in sync with the filling. The stuffing was a classic: browned beef, quick-cooked rice, minute rice, canned tomato sauce, and finely chopped onion. Seasonings ranged from spice rack oregano to those ubiquitous Italian packets. Each half got neatly stuffed, upright in a baking dish, with a splash of water to help them steam and soften to perfection. The finishing move was simple but essential: a melted cap of mozzarella cheese right at the end of baking. They looked elegant, tasted hearty, and fulfilled every nutritional checkbox without skimping on taste or tradition. 21. Sloppy Joe pie. Sometimes, a meal needs a little more polish without losing its charm. Enter Sloppy Joe pie, the cleaned-up version of the classic, dressed to impress but still ready for seconds. At its base was that familiar sweet-savory mixture: ground beef browned with onions and kissed with ketchup, Worcestershire, and a dash of brown sugar. But instead of spooning onto buns, the mixture found a new home in a buttered casserole dish. Then came the surprise: a thick layer of cornbread batter, either lovingly made from scratch or speedily mixed from a box, was poured over the top. Baking brought magic. The cornbread rose and turned golden, its edges catching just enough of the beef's saucy richness. The result: a meal that looked like a Sunday dinner centerpiece but was made with weeknight ingredients. Paired with a simple salad or canned beans, it brought dignity to dinner, even if the bank account needed a miracle. 22. Shipwreck Casserole. The title said it all: Shipwreck Casserole, a dish born from desperation and scavenged optimism. When payday was days away and groceries were running low, this dish turned pantry dregs into family favorites. Ground beef was stretched with whatever canned vegetables were on hand: corn, green beans, tomatoes, then seasoned with a packet of onion soup mix for that help-in-a-pinch flavor. Cream of whatever soup was used to bind it all together. But the crown: a layer of crushed potato chips, tossed on top in glorious crunchy defiance. Baked until those chips browned to perfection, the result was a casserole layered with soft savory comfort underneath and crispy edge of hunger joy on top. Kids fought for the corners. Adults muttered grateful sighs. Shipwreck Casserole reminded everyone that you didn't have to start with abundance. Just a little creativity, some leftovers, and faith that flavor could rise from rock bottom. 23. Salisbury Steak. Before frozen dinners reduced it to a bland memory, Salisbury steak was a weeknight triumph, working-class comfort disguised as elegance. Named after Dr. James Salisbury, who believed beef was good for your health, this was a dish made to make a little meat feel grand. You'd start with ground beef, breadcrumbs, egg, and a splash of milk, binding everything together before shaping it into thick, oval steaks. Pan-fried until golden on the outside, those patties were set aside while onions caramelized in the same skillet. The real richness came from the gravy, built up from beef drippings, flour, and broth, swirled until it clung to the spoon like a Sunday roast. Smart cooks made extra patties to freeze for future dinners, saving themselves time and stress. And when kids saw it on the plate, they didn't see budget food, they saw steak night. This was dignity and flavor served with practical pride. 24. Corn chip beef bake. Sometimes the best dishes are born when innovation meets leftovers. The corn chip beef bake turned last night's broken chip bag into tonight's crunchy, craveable dinner. The essence was simple. Brown some ground beef and season it with whatever passed for Mexican-inspired in the 70s. Chili powder, cumin, or maybe just a packet if the budget stretched that far. Stir in canned beans, some corn, diced tomatoes, or whatever pantry survivors you could scavenge. Layered into a casserole dish, the mixture formed the foundation. Then came the topping, crushed corn chips, the more flavorful the better, followed by an even coat of shredded cheese. Baked until gooey inside with a toasted golden top, the result was pure chemistry. The corn chips added texture that danced with every bite. Paired with a crisp lettuce-tomato salad, this wasn't just a way to save dinner, it made it feel like a celebration. Hail to the happy accident. 25. Ketchup glazed meat patties. Ketchup wasn't just a condiment. In 1970s kitchens, it was a glaze, a shortcut, a trick up timeless sleeves. These meat patties weren't just shaped like ground beef. They were elevated with a sweet, savory topping that caramelized beautifully in the oven. You'd start with the usual suspects: ground beef, breadcrumbs, egg, and everyday spices formed into firm, oval patties. Then came the alchemy. A simple glaze of ketchup, brown sugar, vinegar, and a dash of Worcestershire was brushed over each patty. As they cooked, the glaze bubbled and thickened into a sticky, tangy coat, a sheen of flavor that looked more expensive than it was. The inside stayed tender, the outside gained that perfect edge. Served alongside mashed potatoes and canned green beans, the whole meal looked polished, almost holiday-worthy. But it came together on any old Tuesday. Little did the kids know, it was ground beef dressed on Sunday best. 26. Rag Mop Casserole. Named after the look of tangled cooked noodles, Rag Mop Casserole was a tribute to making the most of whatever was left in the cupboard. It didn't matter if your pasta was broken spaghetti, elbow bits, or last week's stray egg noodles. It all found a home in this one-pan wonder. Ground beef brown with onions formed the hearty base. Then came canned tomatoes, tomato sauce, and the real 70s glue, condensed mushroom soup. Cheap, rich, effective. The noodles were folded in, sometimes pre-cooked, sometimes softened in the sauce as it all baked together. Herbs from the backyard or the dollar spice rack added a fresh note. You didn't need a fancy cheese topping unless your fridge offered it. Still, each bite was cozy, textured, and honest. Best of all, it fed multiple meals, and leftovers often tasted even better. Rag Mop wasn't glamorous, but it was resourceful comfort at its finest. 27. Midwest Meat Pie. Elegant and earthy, the Midwest meat pie was the heartland's answer to making something out of almost nothing, and making it feel like everything. Ground beef met diced potatoes, diced carrots, and whatever else your backyard garden or root cellar could supply. Seasonings were minimal. Simplicity was the goal. Once cooked through, this hearty mixture was folded into pie crust, homemade or from a can, with a second crust laid over the top like a finishing touch. Crimped edges, a few steam vents cut in, and it was ready for the oven. What emerged wasn't flashy, but it was deeply satisfying. Golden and flaky on the outside, tender and meaty on the inside, every slice brought warmth and quiet reassurance. You could prepare it ahead, bake it later, and serve it like a feast. In a decade filled with sacrifices, this pie stood tall, firm, flavorful, and full of good Midwest common sense. 28. Beef and Potato Casserole. Sometimes the simplest meals leave the strongest impressions. Beef and potato casserole was pure, fearless comfort food, bringing together everyday basics to create something undeniably good. Browned ground beef, golden slices of potato, and a creamy sauce blended into a bubbling masterpiece under a melted cheese crown. No superfoods, no substitutions, just heat, melt, and magic. In a world before social media and 40-step recipes, this dish reminded you why Grandma didn't need complexity to impress. She knew what tasted good and what filled bellies, often at the same time. The cheese, of course, wasn't sparing. More cheese equals more love, they said, and the dish delivered on both. Served in one dish with minimal cleanup, it was a winner on every level. and there was always room for seconds. Because if any dish taught families how to stretch and savor every spoonful, it was this humble, hearty, unforgettable casserole. 29. Tamale Pie. Tamale pie wasn't born from the traditions of ancient tamales. It was born from the American instinct to simplify, adapt, and bake. Inspired by the essence of Mexican cuisine, but filtered through mid-century practicality, this dish evolved into a layered, bake-and-serve comfort food masterpiece. Picture seasoned ground beef packed under a thick blanket of cornbread or masa. Early versions were just beef and chili sauce tucked between layers of cornmeal mush. But as more is better defined the mid-century kitchen, the fillings expanded. Corn, olives, cheese, green peppers all found their way in. Nobody knows which clever home cook first brought it to life, though it likely came from the crossroads of Texas, Mexico, or California. What mattered most was how it tasted. Humble, hearty, and boldly spiced, it became an easy classic. A little messy, a little fused together, but unforgettable. That's how the tamale pie cemented its spot on dinner tables everywhere. 30. Hamburger soup. At first glance, hamburger soup might sound confusing. A hamburger in soup form. But one bite made everything make sense. It blended the best of burger night and vegetable stew into a rich, savory broth brimming with warmth. Ground beef was browned, then simmered with onions, celery, carrots, and potatoes, or any veggies left at the end of the week. The beef soaked up the broth's savory goodness, creating spoonfuls of flavor no fast food drive-thru could match. Add pasta, barley, or both if you want to bulk it up. A splash of tomato sauce or canned tomatoes gave it just enough tang to cut the richness. Simple, nourishing, and endlessly adaptable, it filled the house with an aroma that meant dinner was about care, not convenience. Leftovers only got better as the flavors married overnight. This soup didn't just feed a big crowd, it fed the soul, one ladle at a time. 31. Beef chili. Chili was never just food, it was folklore in a pot. Grandma's chili believed in simplicity, just ground beef, beans, tomatoes, and chili powder, but it always tasted like something more. Warm, spicy, hearty, it hugged you from the inside out, especially on cold days when you needed it most. Though Texas purists swore off beans, households across the country added them for bulk and texture. Every family swore by their own twist, more cumin, a kick of hot sauce, a dash of brown sugar. And in the 1970s, when you needed dinner to do the work of heat, comfort, and economy, chili stepped up. It was party food, family food, make-ahead-and-freeze food. It brought people together, simmered all day, and honestly, tasted even better the next day. Whether ladled into bowls, poured over rice, or spooned onto cornbread, chili was, and still is, a reminder that good food doesn't need to be fast. It just needs to be bold and made with love.